Well, Bracket Week continues here on CBS Sports HQ. If you haven't filled out your bracket as part of our bracket challenge, Chip Patterson is here to help you make those picks. Chip, welcome. Let's start with the South region. We've got a lot to get through here. A lot of brackets have the overall number 1 seed Alabama out here getting to the Final Four and the title game. What say you? Walk us through your take on the South.
Yeah, very favorable path for Alabama. I do not see the Crimson Tide being tested in the first round or very many times until we get closer to the Final Four. We move the Crimson Tide on into the second round. Maryland against West Virginia. Hey, wasn't this a bowl game a little while ago? A physical, bruising battle between these two teams. I think West Virginia is better tested for it thanks to life in the Big 12. I will move the Mountaineers on. Potential upset pick that could be a little trendy. Everyone looking at Charleston and their 31 wins and their up-tempo style of play. But Jeremy, do not get tricked. Do not take the bait. This San Diego State team has 9 players who average 15 minutes or more, a very deep rotation, and they have 7 seniors and 2 juniors in that 9-man rotation. They've been building to this point. They do not want to be a one and done. I'll take the Aztecs in a hard-fought game against the Cougars. And finally, I will take Virginia. I was encouraged by some of their performance in the ACC tournament. They did not look good coming down the stretch of the regular season, but I think built up a little bit of confidence as they made it all the way to the tournament final. Fantastic game between Creighton and NC State. I love the guard play that you get from NC State, and obviously Creighton between Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, of course Ryan Kalkbrenner, very versatile. I will take the Jays, and I will look at Kalkbrenner against DJ Burns as the big matchup there. And UC Santa Barbara, boy, they put a scare in some high major teams before, but I think Baylor is able to escape. It's going to be a low-scoring, low-possession game, but I trust Baylor's backcourt to be able to get it done. Fantastic, potentially high-scoring game. Great shooting on both sides of Missouri and Utah State. Dennis Gates in his first year with the Tigers done a great job. I'll advance Missouri. And then Arizona against Princeton. I do not foresee any 2-15 upset here. Tommy Lloyd's Wildcats advance. Alabama, West Virginia, look, one of these teams is able to score at a really high level. I will take the Crimson Tide and move them on. And then San Diego State, Virginia, this is first team to 60 wins. Both teams play at just a turtle's pace, and both teams really rely on the defensive side of the ball. Here, I will take that experience, and I will take San Diego State and advance them on into the Sweet 16. The Mountain West, which has gotten dogged, I've got them getting a few into the second weekend. Creighton over Baylor. The thing that I'm concerned about Baylor with is its defense, and that's where I think Creighton's got so many weapons they can pick them apart. And then Missouri and Arizona. I don't think Missouri's got the bigs to be able to deal with Azuolas Tubelis and Amar Bello down low. So I move Arizona in. Tasty little rematch of a early season game that we saw between those two. San Diego State can't get enough buckets to hang with the Crimson Tide. I move Arizona in. Somewhat chalky by we get to the end of this, but, because Arizona is going to take down Creighton, I've got Arizona over Alabama, and this is where I bring to your attention that the number 1 overall seed has not won the NCAA tournament in each of the last 9 NCAA tournaments. I think Alabama will trip up at some point. Arizona seems like a good spot where that might happen.
Wow, okay. So it is the 2 seed Arizona getting through out there. Let's drop down to the East region. Purdue, the top seed. Oh, but Duke is playing some Duke basketball again. Marquette and Kansas State will also be in the mix. Who do you like here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move Purdue. We don't need to. Fairleigh Dickinson, by the way, would be ridiculous. They're one of the shortest teams in all of college basketball. If they had to defend Zach Edey, that would be hilarious. But Memphis FAU is one of the best 8-9 games on the entire board. I've got Memphis advancing. Very encouraged by Kendrick Davis, DeAndre Williams, what they were able to do, getting that win against Houston in the American Athletic Conference Final. Played well against them in the regular season as well. Duke and Oral Roberts, from the gambling perspective, is a little bit interesting. These are 2 of the worst teams in against the spread percentage in the entire field of 68. Now, Duke not covering the spread happened a lot earlier in the year, not so much during this current 9-game winning streak that they're on. And Oral Roberts has the longest winning streak in the entire country. But I move Duke ahead. I think that defense shuts down Oral Roberts' offense. Blue Devils advance. I think Tennessee is going to have some trouble with Louisiana forward Jordan Brown. That dude is an absolute hoss in the Sun Belt, but ultimately Tennessee is the better team. I will advance the Vols past the Ragin' Cajuns. great storylines as we got Providence big man Bryce Hopkins going up against his former team in Kentucky. Kentucky dealing with a few injury issues, but I do like them flying a little bit below the radar, and I do think they've got higher end offense. I will advance Kentucky past Providence. Probably one of my least confident picks in the East region for the first round. And then Kansas State over Montana State. This one was somewhat of an easy pick for me. Montana State falling short of expectations, at least in terms of the predictive metrics and covering the spread often throughout this season. Michigan State over USC. USC's got some pretty key injury issues that are going to make it tough for me to, back the Trojans in this spot. Plus, it's Tom Izzo, and I love that 1-2 punch of Tyson Walker and A.J. Hoggard. Everything runs through those two for the Spartans. And then while Vermont might put a scare into Marquette, they ain't winning this game. So we take Marquette and we advance them on to the second round. Top of the second round, Purdue takes down Memphis. Memphis over Purdue. This is a spot where I think that Memphis has to use the blueprint that it had to nearly take down Gonzaga. Remember, Memphis in the second round against Gonzaga had to go up against Drew Timme and Chet Holmgren and nearly won that game. A lot of the same players on this team. I think that they can take some of those lessons and be able to get a second round upset. Then Duke over Tennessee. Both teams are great defensively, but what Duke has that Tennessee doesn't is young players that are coming into their own who can make shots, particularly Dariq Whitehead, the freshman, who can knock it down from three, and Tyrese Proctor, the point guard, who's done a very good job of getting more comfortable in that role. You go down to Kentucky and Kansas State. I'm a little bit concerned about how Kansas State is so reliant on Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. I think that Kentucky's got better, third, fourth options if one player's off a little bit. So I'll take the Wildcats and move them to the Sweet 16. And then finally, the great run for Shaka Smart continues. I've got Marquette here. And look, this is a time for Shaka Smart to rewrite the recent narrative that he hasn't been able to win or cover spreads since leaving VCU. I think that Marquette's able to do that by making it into the Sweet 16. Memphis against Duke. As you can see, this thing is really breaking Blue Devils. I think that Duke is just playing phenomenal basketball right now, and you get Purdue out. Now all of a sudden, Kyle Filipowski, Mark Mitchell, those bigs are going to be able to absolutely eat against Memphis. Duke moves on. And then for Kentucky and Marquette, I say Marquette moves on. And Jeremy, this is where setting matters, because this East Regional Final played in Madison Square Garden. Hey, that should be an advantage for Marquette, right? A Big East team? Well, it's as much of an advantage for the Duke Blue Devils, who play one game a year in Madison Square Garden. The New York area is filled with Duke alumni and fans. As John Rothstein said on CBS Sports Network, he sees this becoming Cameron North, and Duke advances to the Final Four.
Wow, okay, so we have Arizona and Duke so far on one side of the bracket, making it into the Final Four. As we swap to the other side, the Midwest region is headlined by Houston, but Texas, Xavier, Indiana, Miami also here. How do you see this side playing out, Chip?
I think that we might be doing a Texas two-step by the end of this, but we can wait. Houston moves on. I think that they rest Marcus Sasser against Northern Kentucky. Lower scoring game. Northern Kentucky, a defensive team. Houston, obviously one of the best defenses in the country, but Houston advances without too much stress. Auburn over Iowa. This game is in Birmingham, Alabama. If you don't think that War Eagle is going to be packing that thing out, then you are sorely mistaken. Keep moving down, and this is where it gets chaotic, all right? This is going to be late on Friday. The early session is where we get UConn against Rick Pitino, where we get VCU against St. Mary's. Catch your breath after all that, Albany, because I think we might have some upset specials. I've got Drake over Miami. The key here is the health of Norshad Omier. Omier is Miami's best post defender, and Drake is led by a player in Tucker DeVries who could have gone to a Power 5 school. He had an offer from Iowa State. He had an offer from Florida, but he decided to go to Drake to play for his father. He was the freshman of the year in the conference last year, first team all-conference this year, 6'7" player who can score at all three levels. Drake gets past Miami. And then finally, this is where, again, I'm going to get stuck in my narrative bag, because Kent State is coached by Rob Senderoff. Rob Senderoff was an assistant coach for Indiana under Kelvin Sampson when they got in hot water with the NCAA. And by the account of some, Rob Senderoff really fell on the sword for the Hoosiers program, got himself a 30-day suspension from the NCAA, had to work his way back into the coaching ranks. This Kent State team plays great defense. I think that it is poetic the way that Kent State will bounce Indiana in Albany, last game of the day on Friday. Moving on down, Iowa State going up against Mississippi State and or Pitt. I'm going to advance Mississippi State and or Pitt. You know, this is a Cyclones team that has a ceiling of making it to the second weekend and a floor of being one and done. Pitt may be more dangerous than Mississippi State, but either way, I think Iowa State's very vulnerable to be that team, as we've seen in 10 out of the last 12 years, who loses to a winner coming out of Dayton. And while Kennesaw State, I think, can put a nice scare into Xavier, thanks to their pace and three-point shooting, Xavier, over the course of 40 minutes, I do expect will win. Sean Miller keeps it moving for the Musketeers. And then Texas A&M and Texas in the same pod. Everyone's going to be looking ahead, but not so fast, because Penn State is just too daggum good at shooting these threes, and the Nittany Lions are white hot right now. I think Penn State gets past Texas A&M, and while Colgate, speaking of three-point shooting, best three-point shooting team in the entire country, could get a little bit dicey, but they don't have the horses to keep up with Texas. So I've got Texas moving past Colgate. We do not get Texas A&M, but we will get Texas Penn State. More on that in just a little bit. Going to the top of the bracket by the time we get here, Houston over Auburn. I feel pretty confident about that, just because Auburn is going to be in a position where they're going to try to put a lot of ball pressure on Houston, and I think Houston is ready for that. And then Drake and Kent State. I love these 12-13 second-round games, Sweet 16 on the line, Cinderella guaranteed. That's where I'm going back in my Tucker DeVries bag, baby. We advance Drake to the Sweet 16. Xavier against Pitt would be absolutely fantastic for a lot of narrative reasons, but Xavier against Mississippi State would find a problem where Mississippi State can't get buckets. Xavier is a really, really good offensive team, and they've been spending enough time without Zach Freemantle that it's not an issue. Sully Boom leads the way, Musketeers into the Sweet 16. And then Texas, with its deep lineup, I think is able to put the clamps on Penn State. They've been really good defensively. Unders have been cashing left and right. So I've got Texas into the Sweet 16. Not total chalk, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 12. And this is where Drake finds themselves just totally out of their depth. Houston advances to the Elite Eight. I think Texas wins over Xavier in an absolute classic. And then Houston and Texas, with a trip to Houston for the Final Four on the line. This is where I think the health of Marcus Sasser has me getting on the other side of the Cougars. The draw was favorable so that if he is not able to play, or if he re-injures that groin, that, you know, Houston should be able to get by all these other teams. You can't get past Texas. They're deep. They've been playing great team defense, and they've got their own great veteran guard leadership with Marcus Carr. So I'm going to go Longhorns out of the Midwest.
Wow, okay. Lastly, perhaps the biggest coin flip region, at least in my opinion, the defending champions Kansas in the West, with Gonzaga, UCLA, and UConn also here. I've seen a lot of brackets that don't have the Jayhawks making it out. What say you, Chip Patterson?
Yeah, well, let's get into it. You know, there's 9 teams with title odds of better than 20-1. And Jeremy, of those 9 teams, 4 are in this region. Half of the legitimate national title contenders are all in the West. It's bananas. Kansas, let's go ahead and get them on into the second round. Arkansas over Illinois, and the difference for me is not just that Eric Musselman has guided the Razorbacks to back-to-back Elite Eights, but Nick Smith, the freshman guard, is able to give some playmaking that has been missing for the Razorbacks a lot of the season. They are seeded like an 8 because they have taken losses, but I think they're better than that. I'm going VCU over St. Mary's. Really tough trip for the Gales. They come from California to Albany, New York. It's the early game of the day, and VCU's fans are going to travel. Great defensive matchup, but I think the Rams can take down St. Mary's. And then UConn against Iona. Iona just does not have the horses to keep up. I've got UConn advancing to the second round. Real home court advantage for 2 teams right there. Should be an electric atmosphere in the bridge game mid-afternoon on Friday. When I'm looking at TCU and playing either Arizona State or Nevada, I think the Horned Frogs have just been too solid this year, and the concerns about potentially playing at altitude, I am not going to factor into this matchup, but take note that these games are in Denver, and then Gonzaga over Grand Canyon. Much love to Bryce Drew, but Gonzaga's been playing some of the best basketball of anybody in the entire country over the last 6 weeks, so I've got Gonzaga advancing out of that first round matchup. I'm going Northwestern over Boise State. Pay a lot of attention to the Mountain West, and the Mountain West is going to be a theme after they went 0 last season. There are teams that I like a San Diego State, and there are teams that I think have been below standard, and I think that Boise State is one of those. I will also go UCLA over UNC Asheville. Not concerned about the injuries playing a role here yet. Moving back up to the top, we go Kansas over Arkansas. I just think that this Jayhawks team has been playing better than the predictive metrics, better than the resume metrics, been higher on the Jayhawks all year. So I'm going to keep rolling with them. And then VCU against UConn. This is where UConn's versatility, they got so many different players who can get it. You know, it's going to be Tristan Newton, it's going to be Hawkins, it's going to be Adama Sanogo, Andre Jackson even. I just think that if one or two guys are off, UConn's got great third and fourth options, and that's going to be key against the pressure defense of VCU. TCU against Gonzaga. Now is when I will talk about playing with elevation. I think that could be a problem for TCU as Gonzaga plays at a blistering pace. UCLA against Northwestern. I just don't think that Northwestern has enough capable scorers, and this is where Jaime Jaquez, Tiger Campbell, and their ability to get buckets in low possession games are going to end up showing up. Super chalky here in the West, but that's because, as I just mentioned, 4 legitimate national title contenders in this region. Best Sweet 16 that I am forecasting here. I will go Kansas over UConn. This is where it's a coaching edge to Bill Self, in my opinion. He's just a lot of been there, done that. And then for Gonzaga and UCLA, a rematch of that classic from 2 years ago in the Final Four. I've got Gonzaga winning this one again. And then Kansas over Gonzaga, I do think is an advantage for the Jayhawks. This is where the 17 quad one wins, and this is where the path that Kansas had in the Big 12 on the way to a Big 12 regular season title gives them the experience to be able to go and get the stops and the plays they need. Kansas moves on to the Final Four.
All right, so Gonzaga, disappointment again. And Chip, looking at your Final Four, I mean, only one seed in there. So take us through who gets to the Natty and who wins it all.
Yeah, a 1, a 2, and a 5. It's not loaded with ones, but we got some quality teams up there. And by the time I played my bracket out like this, I looked at Arizona and I looked at Duke, and I thought that, hey, you know, these are teams that would make a great matchup, and they've got great history going up against each other. They both have great bigs. But ultimately, I think Courtney Ramey, who we saw have a huge role in Arizona's Pac-12 title game win against UCLA, I think he's been so big for them in tight spots. Little bit better guard play with Ramey and Kerr Kriisa. So I've got Arizona taking down Duke in one semifinal. And man, I don't think Texas is going to be able to beat Kansas for a third time in a row. This would be the 4th matchup between these two teams. I've got Kansas advancing, and against all odds, Jeremy, you know, you've got Bill Self sidelined by a health issue. You've got a team that has been sent to Las Vegas instead of getting Kansas City. I've got the Kansas Jayhawks becoming the first repeat national champion since the Florida Gators, and I think it will be a more impressive feat than what the Florida Gators did, because they brought back basically the same core, and that's not at all what happened. You know, you lose 4 of your top 6 scorers from a national championship team. You only bring in like 1 key transfer, bring in like 1 5-star freshman. Everybody else is someone who was on the team last year playing less minutes, now playing better, playing more minutes. It is a reflection of the program that Bill Self has built. And I think it will have us really talking about what many have been saying all season, that Bill Self is the current best coach in college basketball. So I've got the Jayhawks cutting down nets again.
He is CBS Sports college basketball analyst today. Chip Patterson doing the heavy lifting, filling out his bracket for us. Great stuff as always, Chip. Great information and a pretty impressive bracket. And with that in mind, get your bracket in now on the CBS Sports app. You can play in a pool with friends and join our men's and women's challenges for the chance to win a new SUV and trips to the 2024 Final Four. Get the CBS Sports app or visit cbssports.com/bracket to play now.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.